Welcome to episode 3 of Your Take. I'm your host, James Ewen. Your take, your path, your perspective. Today's guest is a solo musician who was born in 1952. He discovered music at a young age, performing in folk clubs around Newcastle. After studying in Bristol, he moved to the capital to become a social worker. It was here he met fellow bandmates John Illsley and Pick Withers, and with his brother Mark would form Dire Straits. From Sultans of Swing, Wild West End, and Lady Writer, David left Dire Straits during the height of their popularity when recording the band's third LP, Making Movies. Since leaving the band, he has worked as a solo musician, releasing various albums, performing live on stage around the world, and collaborating with other artists. Your Take are joined today by David Knopfler. Warm welcome to David. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, James. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right, thanks. Yeah, yourself?
Good. Yeah, not bad. Feels a little early, even though it's not. It's early for a musician, you know.
Yeah?
I was up till 3 in the studio last night, very foolishly, yeah.
I struggle with early mornings, and I think that's the joys of having 2 young boys that wake me up around about 6.
I was on the school run at 8:15, and then, but I was in the studio till 3. So put the maths together, yeah.
But yeah, thanks for joining us today. With Your Take, we kind of go back in time. We turn the clock back years and years and years back to when you were a young lad growing up and how you discovered music. But to start with, I wanted to talk about current projects within the last 12 months.
Right.
You've released a new collection of songs under the album title Songs of Loss and Love.
Does that look backwards to you, or is that the right way around? It's back to front to me, or is it upside down? There we go. How's that? Is that any better?
It's the right way now, yeah.
Okay.
So I just wanted you to just tell us about the songs on the album.
I don't remember much about them. It's been and gone. I don't look back. Yeah, go on. Sorry, finish your question, James.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you about the songs on the album, and were they written from personal experience?
Well, every album's a bit, you've got a mixture. Some of it's personal experience and some of it is not, it's a half and half. It's very off-putting. I can't hear my own mic, which is most disturbing. I'm not used to sitting with headphones and yet not being able to hear. It's from an engineering point of view, it's very disturbing to think, because you would assume immediately that you're not actually recording. But it says recording, so I'll have to just get used to it and trust it. Yeah. So you always went, and to answer the question, so you write partly from personal experience and partly from your own emotional response to things, obviously, but the song takes you where the song wants to go. The song leads, so you might start with one idea, but the song makes its own demands on you. When you find a line that's too good to resist, you find a line that's, I'm working on a new song now, and I've got a couple in it, which is, you live in the blazing sun, and so I live in darkened shadows, you live in the blazing sun. It was a rhyming couplet, 2 more lines before it, but the point was that I just thought, well, I've got to use that, and it completely changed the meaning of the song I was writing. It took it to a whole other place, and I thought, well, now I've got to write about this, because that's what, that couplet is too good not to use, and things just materialize like that. So it's an adventure every time you write, and there's no formula. I don't write, but sometimes you have a fairly fixed idea, but it rarely works out. Usually the song commands you to edit to the demands of the song. So I sacrifice everything to that, really.
When you sort of get up in the morning and you start a day, when you decide to, do your music or whatever, do you have a set idea of, I'm going to write so many songs in a day, or I'm going to practice
Absolutely not.
a certain thing?
No.
It just comes naturally.
No, I don't think about it. It's as natural as breathing. I've just always worked with instruments and music, and I've never known anything else since a little boy. So it's a first language for me, and talking is a second language,
Obviously, the last 12 months has been incredibly difficult for musicians during the pandemic with not being able to tour.
Yeah.
How have you been able to, make money during the last 12 months? Have you been using, your website? Have you used any other means?
Yeah, all of that. Patreon's been a godsend. Touring stopped a while back, but I've been kind of in self-isolation for several years now anyway. I've made about 3 or 4 albums here in my studio. Some of the tracks were recorded in studios previously. Most of it is now, especially now, is just what I'm creating myself and sending out sessions, But Patreon's been a huge help. I signed up for Patreon, and my wonderful patrons have made a big difference. So I'm able to hire a cellist if I want one. I'm able to hire a pedal steel player, whatever I need to finish a song. I've just sent some tracks off last night to a fiddle player in America. It was pretty miraculous that you can do that. You send the track, and 9 times out of 10, if you've picked the right person, George Schilling, for example, who plays cello, he's an engineer by trade, but he's a fantastic cellist. I send a track to him. It's unlikely that I'm going to ever want to change a note. I mean, sometimes you do. I think I've once sent something back for a suggested amendment. I'm not even sure I was right to, I mean, a lot of these session players are so experienced and so good at what they do that they effectively write. Harry Bogdanov's my regular guitarist, go-to guitarist, and keyboard player. We both play guitar and keyboard, so we swap about. When I'm on keyboard, he's on guitar, and when I'm on guitar, he's on keyboard, usually, sometimes 2 guitars. And I mean, he's just a fantastic creative performer, so you don't need to give them set parts. I mean, some songs obviously come with set parts, but it's rare. More often than not, they will find their own thing. So the creative process, it has my name on the album. But the wonderful thing about creating music is that everybody puts their little stamp on it. And if you've picked the right ingredients, you get a lovely cake. If you get it wrong, well, sometimes you just hit a race, it just doesn't work out. And that's awkward, You just can't, you use 2 phrases from a whole take or something, but that's so rare. And the trick is usually to get people that you've worked with before and you know who you're dealing with and what you're going to get.
Obviously, since you started in the music industry, when you really had your breakthrough in the 70s, obviously it's changed.
So yeah, how? Yeah, completely.
With the advancement of digital, and it's a lot cheaper now and cost effective to go out as a young musician to make an album. With regard to the material you release now, is it all mixed by yourself and distributed solely by you?
Nothing's the same at all. I mean, it's all completely different. It's nothing is the same. It's the internet changed everything from 94. The record companies just started folding in the 90s. From the mid 90s onwards, I think my last promotional tour where we were doing televisions and radio and all that old-fashioned stuff without reference to the internet, that was in the mid 90s. And behind me as I was going, I was doing a TV in Sweden, and then the record company collapsed there. Then you go to France and the record company collapses there. I mean, it was just all around the globe. They were all folding. None of them could make money. The advances stopped coming in. People couldn't afford to, record companies couldn't afford to pay advances. Ergo publishers couldn't afford to pay advances. So, I mean, luckily for me, I'd already set up my own label right from the get-go from 1983. So I was already well versed and used to making my own records and releasing my own records. So it wasn't such a trauma, really. It was just a case of going back to what I already knew anyway. I went through the majors from time to time, but I was never that dependent on them. So yeah, it wasn't so bad. And I haven't really found isolation that hard either, frankly. I like it quiet. The birds and nature have been enjoying the peace and quiet. And part of me is sorry it's all ending,
We're going to turn the clock back to your early life and your upbringing. You were born in Glasgow in 1952.
I read that, yeah.
To an English mother who was a teacher and a Hungarian Jewish father who was an architect. Can you just paint a portrait of what they were like as people and your relationship with them?
That's a big one, That's a hard one to answer in a sentence or two. They were complex. My father was very intelligent chess player, stamp collector, intellectual, old school socialist. And when he was alive, we had many little tussles over that, or I was always on the more moderate side to his views, although I'm left of center firmly, I think. He was a good deal he was more of the Jeremy Corbyn school, and right. And I was probably more of the, I don't know what, liberal school. And yeah, I mean, we had lots of tussles. He continued to beat me at chess till I was, until he was an old man. I think he last played with me when he was about 17. He thrashed me. He was a very strong chess player. He was a very clever chap, but very, difficult as well. I think he had post-traumatic stress disorder from his experiences in the 1930s. And my mother was long suffering because of that. So yeah, complex. The things that seemed like problems when I was young, when I was at school in a very narrow kind of racist, bigoted, anti-Semitic environment at Gosforth and Newcastle, where I grew up, that all just changed when I moved to Bristol. And I went to college, and everything just suddenly changes, because suddenly the things that were difficult to deal with and embarrassing, my father having a fight with somebody in a bus because he'd made a racist remark behind us, and I would have just let it go. I was 7. My father was telling the guy that he ought to vote for Hitler, and all this stuff exploding all around me. He was never afraid. When he saw a good fight, he'd get into it. That was his philosophy. If you see a good fight, get into it. And so yeah, I mean, that was difficult too. My mother was quite the opposite. She was everything for respectability and peace and quiet, little peace in the valley. So yeah, I'm a mixture, I suppose, half and half, bit of this, bit of that.
I was going to come on to your brothers, famously Mark Knopfler,
yeah.
But I wanted to, you've obviously been asked so many questions about your relationship with your brother over the years, and we'll come on to the formation of Dire Straits in a minute. But did you have other siblings as well? And I just wanted to ask about your relationship with them as well.
I had a sister I was very close to who's just died recently. Lovely, Ruth. She was a cellist and very clever again. She got the brains again, same as my dad. Mother of 4 kids, brought up 4 lovely kids, worked as a professor in medieval English. Very interesting woman, had a lot going for her. Yeah, so yeah, lots to be said about her that would be interesting. And yeah, we were an interesting family altogether, I suppose. Lots of madness mixed in with it all.
Very early on in your childhood, you moved to Newcastle with your parents.
Yes.
Why did they relocate? What was the reason for that?
My father was an architect, and he went where the jobs went. He started off in Oxford, and had a row, which was his that's how you defined him, really. He had a row. He called somebody a stupid bloody fool for not understanding something to do with something, or he thought we didn't understand something. And he went from Oxford to Glasgow, where he was rather enamored with the architecture there, and then from Glasgow to Newcastle, when my grandmother was in Newcastle. So it was probably partly for my mother, so that she would have some support with these 2 difficult sons,
I wanted to come on about you going to Gosforth Grammar School, obviously in Newcastle.
Gosforth Grammar School, aye.
Yeah, was that a happy experience for you?
No, not really. It was all right. I mean, it was a very mediocre school with pretensions to be a private school almost. The headmaster was very old school. Corporal punishment. You got hit for everything. You got strapped for showing interest in music. You got caned for wanting to play an instrument. You got detention for finding a piano in a hidden corner and playing it. Everything was anti-music. We got hauled up in front of the headmaster for putting up posters for our gigs, and it's just, I was interested in the counterculture and in making music, and it was everything that the school wasn't. So no, not really. I mean, at the folk club, I used to play songs, and I was already writing then. I was still very young, and I'd say this is a traditional folk song, because I thought if I admitted I'd written it, they'd either say, "No, you're not allowed to do that." There'd be a law, or I'd get strapped or something. So they had a folk club, but then they had music classes, but I got thrown out of those for not being able to read the sheet music. I faked it for a year with my viola teacher. One day he rumbled me. He realized that my eyes weren't following the dots. I was looking at it, pretending to be reading it. I just go home and memorize it and play it by ear, And
so how did the discovery of music come about? Because you said that you didn't enjoy your time at school.
It was everywhere. My mother played piano, and we had a piano in the house, and there was a banjo under my bed that belonged to my uncle Kingsley that I'd occasionally try and play. I never got the hang of that at all.
I was going to say, with the 1950s, you've got the rock.
Well, I think the first thing was playing tennis rackets, just watching the shadows on TV. It was, and buying singles was a big deal. And there was a record store at the bottom of Salters Road in Gosforth that had a Fender Stratocaster in the window for £169. Mark and I would walk past that window together and just stop and, press our noses up against the glass and dream. And eventually, Mark got a Hofner Super Solid from my dad, which was a big deal back then. He had the best guitar at the school for £45. The Rossettis were like 16 or 18, and his was 45, 2 pickups. Looked very fancy. And whenever Mark was out of the house, I would pull it out from under his bed and I would play that. So I learned House of the Rising Sun on that guitar, really. And then I bought a Tommy Steele guitar for 10 shillings from a mate one day, which was, I think, the price of about 80 cigarettes. And, it went from there, the piano, the Tommy Steele guitar, and my brother's guitar, between the three. And then my girlfriend had a guitar. I bought my first proper guitar, I think, when I didn't own my own real proper guitar till I was about 21. But I was playing quite proficiently by then with one instrument or another.
As a young kid, what kind of records were you buying? What kind of stuff were you listening to mainly?
My first single was Elvis. I Can't Help Falling in Love with You. Plaisir d'amour, really, it was, I think. Great song. Great, still sounds great to me now. I thought that showed remarkable taste for a boy who was still in these short trousers. The Beatles, the Stones, the Kinks, Beach Boys, anything. I very quickly became quite a musical snob. By the time the 60s happened and Jimi Hendrix came along, and by the mid 60s and late 60s, I was all the way there with what I was interested in. And I had all kinds of quirky records and, friends who were similarly inclined. And, I'd go around to my friend Richard's house, Richard Kelly, and he lived in Benton, which was a bus ride away or a train ride away. I don't even remember how I got there now, but I used to go there quite regularly. And, just play records. I'd bring mine, he'd have his, and he'd be turning me on to something else. And there were people around on 1 or 2 shows on radio, not much, but you had to really search them out, that were playing what we would have considered the real stuff,
And the discovery of the guitar as an instrument, learning the guitar, was that all self-taught, or did you take
pretty
lessons?
much? Yeah, I didn't get the electric guitar was a foreign country to me till Dire Straits, and I had to very quickly. Mark showed me a lot of tricks at that point, and thank God, I hated barring. All getting higher up the fretboard was a whole new adventure for me. I'd never much gone straight beyond the 4th or 5th fret,
Okay.
and as a kind of a folky, really. So yeah, there was a lot of new stuff to learn, and it was a very fast, swift from 77 through to 80 was an extraordinarily fast learning curve. Where, sure, I think I've probably learned more in those 3 years than I learned in the 24 preceding ones,
Before we come on to the formation of Dire Straits in the late 1970s, can we just talk a little bit about your time in Bristol? Because we share this
Yeah,
common affiliation that I'm here in Bristol now. It's my home city.
I
And we
can
went
just
to
hear a little bit of it in your accent, my home city. Just a tiny bit, my lover. Yeah.
And yeah, we went to the same university, the UWE as it's called
In
now.
my day, it was called Bristol Polytechnic. That's right, and just down the road from the fancier Bristol University. So when I say I went to college at Bristol, people assume the university. No such luck.
Enjoy your time in Bristol?
I really enjoyed it. Yeah, I did actually. It was a great college in many respects. We had a great sense of community, nice people, lovely people, some great friends, and some great experiences. Of course, in those days, there wasn't the internet to stay connected to people, you know, and nobody had phones, nobody had addresses even, because every year you'd change your address because you were renting, you know, and it was all, you know, whatever. So when college finished, everybody scattered to them, especially the boys, because they're not sorted like the girls are. Girls would think of these things and they could put a little address in their notebooks. And so I was a bit bereft actually when it all finished, and I was 21 and like, oh, now I'm in the real world and what am I going to do for rent? You know, that was a bit of a shock.
What did you study at Bristol, and what kind of year was this?
It was called a BSc Economics. It was actually externally examined by London University. I think London University, I can't remember to be sure, one of the London universities. And so, yeah, it was a BSc in Econ, it was called, but with honors or whatever. But, you know, it was mostly kind of 4 out of my 5 lecturers were Marxists. So it was a very left-wing experience, which made my dad's training in the area very useful, you know.
You moved from Bristol to the capital. Was that shortly after? And you became a social worker.
Correct. I went to a careers advisor at Bristol Poly, and she said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, I would like to be a musician. I want to be in a band. I want to form a band. I want to play music. And she laughed because, like, you know, nobody seriously thought that was a career choice. And I said, so basically, I want to work in a music store that sells guitars, because if I do that, I'll meet the local musicians. I'll get to know who's good, and I'll get into a band, and away we'll go. That was my plan. That was my life plan at 21. And she didn't think much to that, and which I think I was right and she was wrong. But you know, anyway, she said, "How about social work?" I said, "Well, could I do it in London?" Because my brother was in what I thought was London. He was actually in Essex, a good 30 miles north of London. And she said, "Sure." So she pulled out an advert for a job in Southeast London, which is way down the wrong end of London completely. And I applied for it and got it, much to my surprise. So there I was at 22. Actually, I spent a miserable 9 months working at the DHSS, which I absolutely hated, but that's a whole other episode. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I got the job. I went there, and then of course I realized that Mark and I were a good hour and a half apart, and I crashed in his small flat up in Loughton, where he was living. He was working as a lecturer at what they called College of Knowledge, sixth form college. Back then they called it that. It was mostly kids that had kind of failed their O levels and were resitting, or had failed their A levels and were resitting. They weren't as glamorous then as they are now. Like all things to do with education, really. And so Mark and I really were playing guitar every day. He'd come in from college, and then we'd pick up the guitars and we'd play, and that was pretty much all I remember about it, playing guitar. And it was a good couple of months that before I got my own place. And a lot of the first songs from the first album were created at that time. It's amusing to me when there's a never mind, I'll leave that. It's another long story. It's best not to get into, but yeah.
The two other band members, John Illsley was...
Illsley, yes.
John Illsley was with the band.
Illsley.
Illsley, sorry.
It is Illsley, yeah.
For its entirety. And
the Illsley brothers, not the Isley brothers.
and Pick Withers, the drummer,
right, yeah.
The original drummer. How did you meet them?
I was sharing a flat with John in Deptford. I very luckily got into his flat as a flatmate. And John was working with a punk band that I didn't like. And on a Tuesday night, they would rehearse. And I tried to subvert the band to something that wasn't punk, and that wasn't going to happen. So they were not having anything to do with me, because I was making the kind of music that was like Dire Straits, really. And they were making the kind of stuff that was, popular in 1977, which wasn't, if you know what was going on there in the music scene, it was very, very badly played and aggressive, badly recorded, badly executed noise, very, very in your face. And, some of it was good, but most of it wasn't. And they belonged in the wasn't camp. And so I thought to myself, if I could just introduce Mark to John and tell Mark I found this fabulous bass player, I'd be spared having to go out every Tuesday night to avoid the racket in the flat. Another cunning plan of mine, and it worked, funnily enough. So that was the trio, and then Mark brought in Pick.
In terms of the band becoming signed with Vertigo Records, and then touring all across the world, and the 2 albums you played on, was the success pretty much instant, or did it take?
No, it's been sold as instant, but it really wasn't. I mean, it was quicker than a lot of bands. A lot of bands can be schlepping around for album after album after album. I mean, it was our first album and it broke big, but it took a while. Our first tour, I think our first tour was, first of all, we were playing all the clubs in London, which meant, John piling the gear into the back of his Rover. And we'd take the train because the car was full of gear. And so we'd be on the tube going up to London to a gig. And, the gear would then be unloaded by us at the other end, and then into the gig, and then it'd be loaded back into the car again, leaking oil as it went. I think the car cost about 300 quid. And down John would go with his 3.5 litre Rover back down to the flat in Deptford. And we would jump on the train again. We were playing gigs at the Hope and Anchor and the Rock Garden and all the venues in London. That's where all the A&R guys were seeing us. And that's where the offers of record deals came from. And then from those gigs, we toured with Talking Heads, which was a great, great experience. Loved that. We were opening for them in colleges, college gigs, which was a step up from the clubs. College gigs and small theatres, small civic theatres and things like that, So that was our first, what you would call a proper tour, I think. And then we schlepped around with Climax Blues Band, and then we played with Styx and opening acts basically all over the place for different people, different tours. And then we got a hit away in Holland. Sultans of Swing went to number 6, I think, in Holland. And we were summoned to go and do that equivalent to Top of the Pops. So out we went on my first ever adventure on an aeroplane, which was very exciting, sitting next to John as the G-force pulls you back in the seat. I'd never felt that before. I thought I could get used to this. This is fun. Smoking cigarettes in the back of the plane, as you did in those days. It seems crazy now to think that that's what was normal. And
change world completely, isn't it?
Oh, totally. And then we got to the hotel, which was the first 4-star hotel I'd ever stayed in. Proper hotel, a really good one, not the kind we toured with, the sort of, the 2-star and 3 stars we toured with. There were 1 or 2 good ones on that tour, but nothing like this. It was probably the best hotel in Amsterdam, and then I got the next surprise was suddenly we had 30 interviews to do in one day. Nobody set limits, and the record company had just sprung everybody that was interested onto us, and we didn't get lunch, we didn't get dinner. Back to back. I finally escaped, like 10 p.m. I just thought, I'm all talked out here. I've got nothing to say to anybody about anything. And rules were then ground. I mean, we had a manager who was who'd never done this before. In fairness, he was figuring it out like the rest of us. He'd been a booking agent. He'd never dealt with promotion before.
I was going to come on to the manager, because I always got the impression, having seen documentaries on you as a band and about your success and so on, I got the impression that he was a very shrewd manager. Am I right
Shrewd
to
and
say
ruthless.
that?
Yeah,
Or
absolutely. Yeah, ruthless and shrewd. But we were already signed. I mean, we had already got the deal. I got the deal, in fact. I got Johnny Staines down to our gig, who signed us. Johnny thought he was signing a nice little rockabilly band that might do 20,000 records. And, and I had a conversation with the marketing manager, Alan Phillips, there. And he says, what do you want, David? You don't want to be a cult, do you? You don't want to be a cult band like Little Feat. I said, that's exactly what I want. Sounded fantastic to me. He was thinking global, and I was going, no, we don't want any of that. I want to be cool, and we were never cool. I so wanted to be in a cool band. That never happened. But,
coming back to the manager, what was your relationship like with him?
Difficult, a little bit difficult. Well, I don't want to speak ill of anybody, I could talk about Ed, but not on the record, I don't think. I mean, he's a manager. He did what managers do. They take control of everything, and they're manipulative, and, and they do it so that they can make a lot of money. Honest Ed, I have my own views on that.
Okay. The two albums you worked on with Dire Straits, when you'd look back at those albums now, like 40, 50 years on, what do you think of them? Or do you ever listen to them now? Or is it just...
No, not really. I mean, sometimes, once in a blue moon, I'm asked to do a Dire Straits song in a professional capacity, because somebody in Spain wants to put us in a 2,000-seater gig, and the price for that is, if you want to play in a big band and you want to do that gig, then you've got to do a couple of Dire Straits songs, which really smells of sulfur to me. And I generally manage to avoid it, but sometimes you get caught in a sort of an obligation trap. You've got an agent you've got a long, respectful relationship with for years, and you don't want to disappoint him. And, you've got musicians who want gigs, and you want to work with these people again. And, one thing leads to another. So once in a blue moon, as I say, that happens. And in that event, I'll download it for 90p off from iTunes or whatever it's called, and learn it again. So, I've revisited a couple of songs because of that. But other than, I don't listen to my own work either, really. I don't tend to go back. I'm always fascinated by what I'm working on at any given time. And I really don't spend much time reflecting. Other than interviews, I don't think I ever look back.
I want to come on in a minute to your solo career, but I just wanted to ask you a couple more questions just in relation to
whatever you like. Sure.
The thing I wanted to ask you was about leaving the band, because you left the band during the making of the third LP, which was Making Movies, which I think was around 1980.
New York, yeah.
What made you decide this was it? It was over for you?
I've been struggling with it for about a year. I think it was time to go. Mark had just been watching a Bruce Springsteen session, and had been very enamored with the idea of being the boss. And I think, we were young. Nobody knew how to handle this stuff. We were trying to live up to this thing this ridiculous, huge thing we'd become, selling millions of records around the world. And Mark had this pressure on him to deliver a third album. And it wasn't bringing out the best in people. It was just not much fun anymore. And I'd become a strummer for somebody else's dreams, effectively, rather than an inventive, creative musician. And I didn't see any future in it, other than financial. I couldn't really see where it was going to lead me. And with the combination of that and the difficult, stressful, we were worked off our feet. We'd done too many shows. We'd been worked to death. And we were making a third album in 2 years, something like that, 3 years at the most. It was too much pressure, and things were cracking up. People were cracking up. People were getting Ed was in therapy, I was looking for a shrink. Things were just difficult.
I remember seeing Arena did a documentary around about the time, and there's footage.
Yeah, I remember that one very well. Nigel
Yeah,
Finch, dead now, unfortunately. Wonderful chap. Nigel was directed it. Yes, sorry, go on.
I remember a particular scene. It was almost a little bit like the Chuck Berry incident with Keith Richards, where you're there trying to play the song "Making Movies," which wasn't
make
released
it
on the album.
No.
And Mark's telling you to play something, and you're saying, "Well, I'm doing what you're asking me, but you're not communicating it quite how I'm feeling," And it's quite an interesting.
It's very clever the way Nigel captured that. He actually put me in shadow, which added to the dramatic sense of me being, I think, probably post-production, me feeling a little bit in the dark, so to speak, and out on the sides watching it. But I'd always been an outsider looking in. Even when we were in the band, I was outside. Part of me was always outside it, creatively looking in. But yeah, there was if I was managing a band now, I would tell them, and it's quite important, this, I think, I would tell them to take the 2/12 arrangement fee that is handed out for classical music, and divide, just at the minimum, divide that between all the band members, so that when you're in the rehearsal room doing what we do, what bands inevitably do, and I should have applied it to my own work too. When my bands, the dozens of times I've been together with my guys, so often, something that Harry will come up with will really move the thing up another pace. Pick would do something on the drums that would take it to another place. Those things in those days didn't get acknowledged and didn't get recognized, and to a large extent still don't with bands. And I think that leaves a bad taste too, when you've given your heart and soul to a project, given everything to it, and you're just a strummer at the end of the day, and you become somewhat disposable and it's been, it's been written about, it's been filmed, it's funny, a lot of it in a way. But I had a fantasy that it would be Mark Knopfler and Dire Straits together, and then I'd sort of sneak back a little corner for myself. The way that George Harrison got one song on a Beatles album, that would have very much satisfied me. It would have been really nice, but there wasn't even space for that. It was time to go. It was more than time to go.
From what you're saying, do you think one of the big issues is that the person that's the songwriter or the songsmith is kind of hailed above the other musicians
even if they're not, you can't all be great at the same time, as Jimmy Iovine once said, who was the producer on Making Movies, which didn't help. Yeah, I don't know, it's a long time ago, a lot of water under the bridge. Young people do silly things. They don't really, communication was not a strong point. We would do things, but we wouldn't communicate. Mark is a leader and a powerfully gifted, creative person. He can write really wonderful songs and he can play really wonderful guitar. And he was on his journey, just like I thought I was on mine. And sometimes on these journeys, you find that you're on somebody else's journey. It's okay. It is what it is.
One final question about Dire Straits, and we'll move on. It's about the induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Yeah, a couple of years ago. And I know so much has been said about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and a lot of negativity as well. What made you not decide to go, and what was your reaction to being given that award?
I was going to go, and my brother Mark said he would go if David was going to go. So we were going to go, actually, both of us, which would have been fun. I was looking forward to that. But there was an asshole at the Hall of Fame who was putting up roadblocks to me getting there. I said, I've got to be able to get to the airport and I've got to be flown there, and, my expenses have to be covered. I'm a long way from Detroit, or wherever it was being held, Cleveland, Detroit, I don't remember, somewhere like that. And It was going to be, you know, 3 flights and journeying and traveling, and getting to Heathrow for me is a 4-hour journey, you know, and all the rest of it. And they were just putting their and they were charging something ridiculous, like $10,000 for a seat, but they couldn't afford to pay for me to get economy to them. And I just thought, this is absolutely ridiculous. You know, I'm not a multimillionaire. I'm not a millionaire. You know, either they're going to cover the basic expenses and treat me reasonably respectfully. I'm not asking for the moon. I've been touring all my life. I know how it is with promoters and what their bottom lines are about. So I don't expect, but I expect at least a modicum of, if not respect, then just professionalism. And it wasn't forthcoming. And I got the apology later from some other guys there who were really nice about it, but the guy was an asshole. So in the end, I don't remember his name, thankfully. In the end, I declined and said I wouldn't be coming. And that was that. That was that. Then Mark said he wasn't going to go, and you know, it was all off.
Did you watch the induction, the ceremony?
No, I didn't.
No,
I don't remember if I did. I don't think I did. Some of the guys went. I think Alan Clark went. I think John went, and Mark and I didn't go. So clearly it was. I did Pick go. I don't think Pick went either.
No, I think it was Guy.
It's just John. Yeah, but from the original line, it was just John and Guy. That's right, Guy, who joined the band after I left, and Alan, who joined the band after I left. So yeah, it's a shame. It could have been fun, but I think the whole concept's very financial and very. It's about making money, I think, really, more than anything for them.
Maybe too politicized as well. And
I think it was just yeah, I don't know. They're going to run out of people to induct eventually, aren't they? I mean, you can't, where are they going to find six artists of stature every year? It gets harder and harder.
We'll come on to the solo career, because you've been a solo musician since the early 1980s. It seems to me that you enjoy being a solo musician. And
yeah, well, I don't think of it as being a solo musician particularly, because I work with so many interesting people. It says I'm a solo musician on the records, but I'm just carrying on doing what I've always done, making music and enjoying it, and being really interested and obsessed with the process of writing a song and what is a great song and how to create one. And it's an endless journey of discovery, as people in the arts all know. You know, anybody who paints professionally or who is an actor or who anything to do with creative. And to be honest, you can be creative in any profession. It doesn't have to be the arts. You know, you just your craft is 90% of it. Just getting really good at what you do is just such a joy. There's just as much art in being a presenter or a bricklayer. I mean, you can make it an art form, but music is obviously employs everything. It's fabulously good for all kinds of things, and it's great for an old guy like me because it keeps the Alzheimer's at bay, you know. So yeah, it's just what I do. It's what I've always done, and I don't know anything different. And I'm pretty much oblivious to the perception. I know there's always this perception bubbles around about what it's about, but it's never been about any of that for me anyway from the get-go. So it's really, this is just the same thing as what I was doing when I was performing my first songs as a kid at a folk club in Bristol.
As a solo artist, where do you find is your sort of biggest fan base? Where do you enjoy performing your music the most?
What I enjoy doing and what you get aren't always entirely the same thing. My idea of absolute heaven is to walk into a recording studio with a sound engineer and a band and a blank sheet, and to start working that way. That's my idea of going to church. But the next best thing to that is touring. Certainly has its moments, and it's a lot of laughs. And then again, the same thing is it's working with other people. I've lost track of the question. I'm sorry. Refresh my memory again, James.
Yeah, my question was, where is your sort of biggest, most loyal?
Oh yes, where's the market? Yeah. Right, what they would call the market. Well, yeah. So what I wanted to answer the question. Sorry, yes, I lost my thread for a second. Probably need a coffee. is probably America, because in America they're really lyrics based. They come up afterwards and go, you know, I really like the lyric and the song. Whereas in Germany, it'd be like, Harry, you did a great solo in, you know, it'd be a different thing. But the German audiences have been fantastic. I mean, I've had a fantastic career primarily because of Germany. Germany financially as well kept me afloat with good record deals and good sales and lots of promotion, lots of television, which got me to a level where I could tour sold out concerts in Germany because there was already a profile, so to speak, to use the jargon. And that's been a blessing, because that's just kept me where I want to be, which is kind of in the good clubs and in the small theaters and in the kind of gigs where the audience, you can hear a pin drop. And so I could play with an acoustic guitar, back to my acoustic, to where I started. And there's no worries at all about volume or bands or having to have a drum kit. Or if I come with a drummer, I'll work with a drummer who plays with brushes really quietly. So there's no need for histrionics. Can do histrionics if I'm required to, but it starts getting stupid at 68 to kind of be going out there strutting. It just isn't, you know, it shouldn't be required. I should be able to have some dignity about this, you know, and that's what it is. So yeah, I mean, touring's fun as well because I'm with my best friend. You know, Harry's, you know, maybe my best, certainly my top A list of best friends. I wouldn't want to slight anybody else who's there, but Harry and I are very tight, and we have been for decades, since my first album. So we're at what number are we up to? This is, what is it, CD 19. So, you know, we've been together a long time, made a lot of records.
With regard to touring, have you got anything scheduled?
Yeah, there's a huge tour that's been cancelled, postponed, cancelled. I don't know what the word is, twice. It was originally going to, the pandemic obviously took care of that. It's been rescheduled for, I don't know whether it's scheduled or scheduled. I've spent so much time between here and America, I don't know which is which. Yeah, so it's booked for some time in 2022. But, you know, whether it'll actually happen is anybody's guess.
We're going to move on now to the final set of questions. These are kind of quick fire questions just to find out the things that inspire
Luckily, I'm totally prepared. He lied.
Okay, so the final set of questions for David Knopfler. So question number one, what's your favorite pastime?
Chess at the moment. I've found a new obsession.
Good game as well.
I've signed up to chess.com, and I started doing their puzzles, and I started off scoring as a 400, which is about as lowly as you can be. And I'm now up to about 1700, 1750, which is kind of a decent club player. So that's been quite a journey, and it's only taken me about 4 months to get there. So that's as good as it'll get at 68. I mean, I'm not going to get, I mean, the problem is, you know, they say you should do this in 20 seconds. It takes me 8 minutes 40, you know. You can't, you know, I just can't, I can't work with the speed and the agility. And you watch the genius players on, you know, the genius players like, you know, Carlsen or whatever, and they're just phenomenal, you know. The speed at which their minds work and their ability to recognize the patterns is insane. But I suppose, you know, they've spent a lifetime dedicated to that. So that's why they're really good at that. I don't know how much of it is genius in the end, and how much of it is just dedication to setting your mind to being really good at something.
What's your favorite film and why?
Well, I've got so many favorite films. I was very enamored by the Russian filmmaker Tarkovsky for a long time. When he first started when his films first started coming to England, the USSR was still a thing. And he was a sort of a dissident poet, really, making movies in very oblique, strange movies. And I loved the cinematography in them. You know, the cinematography really gripped me, the way that he would hold a camera for long lengths of time without cuts. And that got me quite interested in film. So because of that, I think I then appreciated films that were similarly. I mean, I noticed on Scorsese's movie, he starts when I think Mean Streets. Not Mean Streets. Sorry, no. Much later. What was it called? The other gangster movie he made, famous one. God.
Goodfellas.
Goodfellas. Thank you. Gosh, my memory's going to hell in a hand card. Yeah, I mean, in Goodfellas, the intro, this long scene with no cuts where they go down underneath into the kitchen area and up to the club, all done with no cuts, seemingly. 1917, that new movie has just done a whole film that way, which is pretty amazing to watch. So yeah, the techniques and the filmmaking stuff really gripped me. That's a second career I might have had if music hadn't got me first.
I'm totally with you on Tarkovsky. I'm a huge fan.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I love The Mirror. I think Mirror's
that was the one that got me first.
Stalker, obviously.
Yeah.
Next question: who's your favorite novelist?
Oh gosh, I haven't read it. I devoured the local library. I read every book in it as a kid. Everything. There was nothing in that library I hadn't read. They let me into the adult section young because I was such a reader. And I read and I read and I read and I read. And somewhere in my 30s, late 30s, I stopped. And I don't know why or what happened. Computer screens, possibly. Eyesight, maybe. But I just stopped reading. I stopped having the attention span to focus down. And so I've started lots of books and I'm halfway through and I'm thinking they're great. And I put them beside the bed, but I just don't finish them. And I can't even explain what that's about. So a favorite novelist, I don't know. I liked Martin Amis, I think, quite a lot when he first released it was a good read. Joseph Heller as a fantastic writer. Good as Gold is very acute and very disturbing.
Catch-22 was
Catch-22 is a work that's fantastic, yeah. Obviously, yeah. I don't know that I have a favorite. It's so crazy, that idea. I mean, who's your favorite poet? Who's your favorite songwriter? I don't really deal in favorites. I like a good song. When I like a good book. I mean, the novelist is almost irrelevant in the end, because they might write a stinker next time. They don't not necessarily that consistency either.
Here's the next one, which I think you probably already answered already. But if you could have worked in a different profession, what would it be?
Film. Yeah, I think so. I think I would have really, really enjoyed that. Again, it's completely absorbing. It's this, as a director of a film, you're in the same thing where there's this whole process. There's a project and a process, and you're going to commit months of your life, maybe a year of your life, maybe 2 years of your life to this project, and it's all consuming. And I think that, sorry,
next one. Who's been your greatest inspiration in life?
Don't know. I get inspired by good songs, and it could be anybody. I mean, any of the great songwriters, Joni Mitchell, Bob Dylan, any of the ones that Tom Waits, any of these characters that come along with an absolute passion and commitment to writing great songs and delivering on them. I mean, anything that when you play it and you hear it, and it makes me want to go to my piano or go to my guitar, I'd add Mark to that list. People that deliver a certain level of quality that, although I don't really know Mark's work, to be honest, I've deliberately avoided it because of not wanting to be influenced by it. And I think vice versa. I think we tend to steer clear. We go on fine, but we tend to steer clear of music, interestingly. So yeah, I don't know, what my greatest inspiration, probably Dylan, because I think my sister brought those records back when I was very young, 11. And I heard the first couple of albums, the Freewheeling Bob Dylan and the grey one with the picture of his face looking like Woody Guthrie. And I played those to death, and they absolutely changed everything. Hendrix changed things for me in a big way. I wasn't influenced by his playing or by his ability to play or his style, but I was influenced by his je ne sais quoi, his coolness and his 60s hipness, you know. Both
Shame.
Dylan and I think both Dylan and Hendrix had that in common. They were hip and they were cool and they were definitely in, you know, of a tilt that I wanted to aspire to. I think it was cultural. I think it was part of the 60s counterculture that was the biggest influence. And I would say all the people involved in that were an influence.
Next one, do you read a newspaper? And if so, which one?
That's a good question because it reveals a lot, doesn't it? I suppose I'd have to confess to The Guardian. I don't like the fact that it puts me in a box, but yeah, probably The Guardian more than any of the others. It tends to more often chime with what I'm thinking or feeling.
What's your favorite food?
Oh, Italian, pretty much anything Italian, I'd say.
Good choice. I think we'll skip the next one because I think you pretty much answered it, perhaps. Your favorite cultural icon. So we'll come on to your favorite curse word and why.
Oh, fuck, obviously. He's just, you know, you avoid it for when your kids are growing up and then you come back to it and it's just as nice as it was before, you know.
I think all our guests have chosen that one so far.
I don't think there's anything that really quite does it. And it's what happens, you know, you stub your toe, there it is, you know.
Instant.
Yeah.
A couple more left. What's your favorite place or holiday destination?
Probably Italy again. I mean, Italy's got a good place in Italy's hard to beat. Favorite, but Australia's got a lot to offer as well. There's so many great places, you know. I could be happy anywhere though. Really, it's the people I'm with. Being with my lovely love, I could be happy in a shoebox, you know.
I think you've already answered this one as well. Who's your favorite music artist and your favorite album?
Dylan, I suppose. Yeah.
And the last one, the penultimate question for your take. Final question of the interview. What is your greatest achievement to date?
Being a father to my children. It counts for far more than anything else. But, you know, I just go on struggling and striving. I'll go to my grave struggling and striving with the music. It's central to me, it's central to who I am. And for better or worse, whether I sell 3 copies or 3 million copies, I'll still go on making the records.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for joining us today. I think that's a very nice way to end and a very nice answer.
My pleasure, James.
Thank you kindly. And yeah, all the best with the touring when you're able to tour again.
Next year, we hope.
And your future recorded projects. Thanks a lot.
Same to you for your projects, James.
Thank you kindly. Thanks for joining us.
All the best.
Have a good day. Thank you.
Thanks. You too.